Hello and welcome to another episode of AppStories. I'm John Voorhees and I've got Federico Batici with me. Hey, Federico.
Hello, John. How are you?
I'm doing great. We're going to talk about a fun topic today. We're going to talk about something that I think for a lot of people is a mystery. And it's even, I will admit, it's kind of a mystery to me to a degree because it changes so quickly. And it's so new. And what I'm talking about is MCP, Model Context Protocol, which is, after all, just another flavor of automation, one that allows you to hook a bunch of things together, which is something that you and I have been doing for many years, but it's just a very different context and with an LLM in the middle of the chain, basically.
And it's a horrible name. So there's also that. Like
everything associated with AI has a horrible name. It
yeah,
really
because
does.
that's what happens when you let programmers and engineers also be in charge of naming things. You end up with MCP, Model Context Protocol. You end up with things like, have you gone to the ChatGPT web app lately?
Not the web app in a little bit.
Okay, so if you go on the web app and if you have a paid account, you can. So this whole thing with GPT-5 was supposed to simplify, right? The model picker menu.
Oh yeah, now, I know.
Yeah. Now if I go and I click on the model drop down at the top, I can choose between. So it says GPT-5. Okay, just a single model. That sounds easy, right? Well, auto, instant, thinking, and pro. Which all right, fine.
The difference between auto and instant? It's like that's not clear at all.
Hold on.
Okay,
because if I select thinking, then another sublayer is revealed. In the search box, there's a new thinking time menu. So you can click the thinking time menu and it says, well, do you want light, standard, extended, or heavy thinking? So there's like 9 different things to choose from.
I've only got 2 because I don't have as fancy account as you, but I have standard and extended. It's a problem on the Mac app too, and that's another thing. The Mac app is completely different in the sense that in the search box you have all these icons that you don't have on the web app. You've got the web search, you've got the research, you've got the agent, you've got the apps you can connect, and then it has a little number that I guess you're supposed to know that tells you that I'm on 5. And then if you click on that, then you get all those things that you were just mentioning. But I can also go up to the top corner and do the same thing up in the top corner. It's all very, very messy.
Yeah. Anyway, MCP stands for Model Context Protocol. So this is, in simple terms, this is a standard that Anthropic, the makers of Claude, released as open source last year. So I think it's turning 1 year old in October or November. It's
somewhere in there.
It's been around for 1 year and it has seen this massive adoption across all the major AI vendors and all of the new wave of AI-enabled services. And we want to talk about MCP sort of to remove some of the mystery from it, but also because at the end of the day, when you consider MCP, it's just in very broad and simple terms, it's a protocol. It's a way to standardize how LLMs can talk to external services via an API. And if you've been following MacStories for the past, how many years, John? 8, 9? How many?
I don't know. For me?
The 27 AppStories. We started in 2017.
Oh, yeah, 2017. Yeah, 2017. So 8 years.
So if you've been listening for the past 8 years or something like that, you know that we've been talking about like app integrations, API-based integrations, things like shortcuts, obviously, but also things like Zapier. And this is the latest sort of flavor of that. Now, I think it's important to contextualize MCP because as with many things in AI, one, it's changing rapidly, very rapidly. 2, it's very confusingly named. And it's not just that it's confusingly named, it's that every single AI company names it ever so slightly differently from one another.
Right. Makes it very hard to tell if you're really talking about the same kind of thing or whether it's their own flavor of it or what's going on.
Yes. And also, things are changing so quickly that although it's supposed to be a standard, the standard has been revised multiple times, even as of a few days ago. So, but we'll get to that. We'll get to that in a minute. So
Maybe
I
we
think,
should
yeah,
start with like an example, just so people kind of
yeah, okay.
have an
So
idea of what the like something simple that you can do
yeah,
with it and why it's useful.
very high level. There are two types of MCP. An MCP, first of all, it requires an MCP server and an MCP client. The client is usually your Claude app or your ChatGPT sometimes. Mostly Claude. I think MCP became popular because of Claude.
Yeah.
And of course, now MCP has also been integrated in clients like Cursor, VS Code, Claude Code in the terminal. So it's also integrated in those like programmer-based workflows. So it requires a client, which is the app that you use to talk to the MCP server. Now, the MCP server, it started last year. These servers were local on your computer. They were actually Node.js
Right.
servers that, in through different integrations with the system, allowed Claude, and only Claude in the beginning, to talk to, for example, AppleScript on your computer. Like some first examples of Claude controlling Spotify or Claude controlling Google Chrome. And that was based on an MCP server. There was a tiny bit of JavaScript running somewhere on your computer that was bridging AppleScript and Claude via this MCP protocol in the middle. So it acts as a middleman between the actual functionality on your computer and the LLM app of your choosing.
Right. And the LLM app is what's kind of interpreting your commands into
Obviously,
what will work with
yes.
AppleScript in that example.
Yes, that is the whole deal there is that you're not actually you're talking to an LLM, so you're using natural language, right? And you're saying things, hey, I want you to open a new tab, or like you're not actually issuing commands in code, you're talking.
Right.
And so the whole promise of MCP is, what if you could take natural language and sort of translate it to machine readable code for a server that can take those commands, perform something, and say it back to the LLM saying, hey, I did this, and the LLM can respond to you, right? That's the whole deal. Like, what if you could simplify interactions between the LLM and something that is not an LLM, because like AppleScript on your computer is not a large language model, but what if you could bridge the two? Now, this started off as a local only thing for Claude on the Mac and on PC. Over the course of the end of 2024 and mostly in 2025, MCP has grown rapidly to the point where you now have essentially two flavors of MCP. You have local MCP servers, those have changed, and I'll get to that in a minute. And you have remote hosted cloud-based MCP integrations. Some of these you may have seen labeled as connectors. If you use
First point of confusion right there.
First point of confusion, like, are connectors based on MCP? Essentially,
Mostly.
yes. Mostly, yes.
Yeah.
Unless you're dealing with custom integrations, proprietary integrations.
Right.
Between,
Which there are
I don't
some.
know. There are some like Anthropic and Google, for example, Anthropic and GitHub. I believe those are like proprietary integrations that Claude has.
Perplexities are custom too. The things they're doing
Well,
those aren't really connectors though, are they? The
here's
things in
the
their iOS app.
here's the thing, exactly what you just mentioned. It's
Yeah.
fragmented in that they're all, as of the past few months, all of these integrations are labeled connectors. They're called connectors in Claude. They're called connectors in ChatGPT, in Perplexity. Some of them are proprietary integrations between two companies. Some of them are actually based on MCP behind the scenes. But my understanding is that all of these major companies are trying to abstract the MCP terminology away from the users to simplify it.
Good and bad, because I
Yes.
think one of the problems with doing that is that it's good to know whether you're dealing with a remote MCP, because there are security concerns around those sometimes, whereas a proprietary thing is probably, in most cases, more likely to be secure.
In most cases, maybe.
There are, of course, I'm not going to say that it's guaranteed. It's more likely because it's built on their proprietary code and connections between companies.
In theory,
it's not
yes.
on the open web as much.
And it goes without saying, of course, that when it comes to MCP, there are massive issues with potential data exfiltration, prompt injection attacks. Simon Willison, one of the leading experts on the modern generation of LLMs, has been writing about this idea of the lethal trifecta when it comes to data exfiltration based on LLMs and MCP servers for a long time. And it's still an issue, although all of these companies are trying to mitigate these issues. But keep that in mind. When you connect your data, your external data to an LLM, there's always the risk of prompt injections, especially when you don't control the entirety of the data that is going into an LLM.
Right, because there have been like proof of concepts where somebody sends you a PDF with invisible text in it, which might be code that will execute on your machine, for instance.
Yes, and saying things like, yes, they call the text from this PDF and send it off to a remote server or something like that.
Right.
Anyway, a simple example of a remote MCP that you can find in all of the major AI apps lately is Notion. Notion has an MCP server. It's hosted on the Notion website, and you can connect it to Claude, to Perplexity, and to ChatGPT. We'll get to the differences between the implementation of MCP in a minute, but that's essentially like one example. Another example of a really popular remote MCP is Zapier. If you want to use, me too. If you want to use a web service with Claude, and it doesn't have a native connector or MCP server for Claude, you can bridge it via Zapier. For example, Spotify doesn't have any LLM integration, but you can enable some Spotify actions in the Zapier MCP server. And when you connect Zapier to Claude, you can then perform Spotify actions, such as searching for a song and adding it to a playlist or creating a playlist in your account. Zapier is, you're going multiple layers down in that case because you're using MCP, which is already like a middleman, and then you're using Zapier, which is another layer of a middleman between two services, but it works. And you can do things like, I have done it myself. I used Google Gemini inside Claude via the Zapier MCP.
Oh, wow. That's wild. That's wild. It's interesting too. Zapier is a good one to pause on for a minute because they just announced this past week that they're bringing their MCP, product to all of their accounts. And the way they're going to do it is the way Zapier works is you buy a plan that gives you a certain number of tasks. Like a pro plan for $20 a month gives you 750 tasks. And those are defined as kind of the blocks of actions in an automation that you set up. With MCP, they're going to charge you 2 tasks per MCP interaction. So it's going to be kind of use up your allotment doubly fast. And I think Zapier is very fascinating to me to see what Zapier is doing because they've obviously looked at what's happening with LLMs and realized, oh, we're in really big trouble if we don't adopt this stuff fast because this is all going to happen and make a lot of what we do irrelevant. So they are even doing these things called tables, which have been around in testing mode for a while, which is very much like the databases in Notion, for instance. And so they're kind of looking at Notion on the one side, these MCPs on the other, and figuring out how are they going to fit in there and make themselves essential and not get squeezed out of the process, I think.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to try my best to make sense of what is a very confusing landscape. So MCP started last year in Claude on the Mac. And it used to be that if you wanted to use MCP, I know because I did it at the time, you had to edit a config.json file on your computer to add a string of text, of JSON text, pointing at the location on your computer of the MCP server. That is no longer the case.
And
You
that was
can still.
inside like the Claude bundle, basic
Oh
app
yeah, it was
bundle. Yeah, I mean, it was
messy.
like you had to dig around in the guts of Claude and
Yeah,
find the right file and edit it.
horrible. You can still do it if you want to, but it's
Yeah,
quite buried in the Claude settings.
yeah,
Now, I want to start with Claude because after all, MCP was created by Anthropic. Before I get into this, keep in mind that the next major spec revision of MCP is coming out in November. So in November, there's going to be, I don't know, I'm guessing MCP 2.0 or something. And it's already been promised that it's going to have a major feature, which is so far been the bottleneck of MCP. MCP 2.0, I'm going to call it, in November 2025, will support asynchronous operations,
yeah.
which
That'll be
means that
nice.
you will be able to kick off long-running tasks without having to wait and sit in front of your LLM for the MCP to finish doing its thing. So that's
Yeah,
going to be nice. Anyway, if you open Claude now, especially on the Mac, you will find two flavors of MCP, and they're not labeled MCP. You're going to have
sure.
connectors. Those are remote based MCP servers. And there's a gallery of built in connectors that have sort of been officially approved by Claude, by Anthropic. Those
Yeah,
are Notion, Zapier, Atlassian, all these major companies.
some local apps too, like messages and the file
Hold on,
system.
because those are your extensions.
Oh,
So you
all
have
right, all
so
right.
you
See, I'm
have
already
your
getting confused.
so you have your connectors. Think of
Yeah,
connectors because they make a connection. Okay, they're
sure,
remote.
sure. Right, right, right.
Extensions, they're local. Those
Yeah,
are like more similar to what it used to be. Anthropic made a big deal out of this revamp of extensions a few months ago, and they have already changed the file format. So these extensions, they started off with a DXT file package that you
yeah.
could download, and it contained a bit of code that allowed you to integrate, like you mentioned, with notes, messages, Safari, music, like local apps, local things on your computer, the terminal, Apple script, you name it. As of a couple of weeks ago, Anthropic has already changed the spec. So these extensions are going to be called MCP Bundle. And they're going to be based on a .mcpb file format.
Say
Your,
that three times
previ-
fast.
your previous DXT extensions will still continue working, but Anthropic and the
Oh,
MCP organization are advising developers to move on to the new MCPB file format. So very high level, you have your connectors, those are remote based, and you have your extensions, those are running locally on your computer. You can also add your own custom remote connector. If you know of a service that offers a remote based MCP connector, you can usually copy its URL and manually add it to Claude on your computer.
okay.
It is slightly different between Claude on desktop and Claude on mobile. Claude on mobile, because of limitations of iOS and iPadOS, does not support extensions. Those are Mac only. It does, however, and I think it is the only LLM so far, maybe actually Mistral lets you do it, but I think Claude is the only major one that supports remote connectors on iOS. So,
Didn't Anthropic break extensions when they went to DTX from JSON? I remember a
yes,
bunch of local
yes.
extent, and so one of the
And now
problems
they're
here,
breaking them again.
yeah, because one of the things is when you go on the web and you look for these things, you're like, oh, this sounds like a really good, open source project I want to try. Sometimes it still hasn't been updated, and it's just broken if you try to install it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a problem.
Now, this is sort of the high level overview of how it works in Claude. You have your connectors, you have your extensions. Connectors
Yes.
work everywhere, extensions are desktop only.
Yeah.
In both cases, they're based on the same spec, they are labeled differently. Anthropic is trying to move away from, they're trying to basically say MCP is the developer terminology. Users call them connectors or extensions. That is
Right.
sort of the idea. Um, Before we talk about ChatGPT, Perplexity, and other implementations, a word of caution. There are many, many ways to manually add a remote connector or MCP server to your LLM app of your choosing. There are many third-party directories that allow you to run cloud-hosted code as MCP in your LLM. Be very careful with the remote connectors that you enable in your LLM app. I personally can vouch for this directory called the Smithery.ai. It's very popular. It's been recommended by the MCP organization, but there are many like it. And, just do some research before you just enable some random configuration running some random JavaScript with the LLM that you use.
Right.
Anyway, the situation is very different in ChatGPT. OpenAI has also jumped on the bandwagon of calling them connectors. However, the connectors that are working in ChatGPT, they only work for some types of accounts. They only work in some regions. And connectors are search only. The whole deal with MCP is that it supports retrieving data, but also performing actions. For example, when I used to use Spotify, I had a project in Claude that allowed me to search for Spotify albums and get me the links for the Spotify albums in Claude, but also I could perform actions in Spotify from Claude, like finding a song and adding it to a playlist. That's an action. You're performing an action. In ChatGPT, connectors are search only. You can only retrieve data. If you enable Gmail or Notion, you can only search.
Are they doing that for security reasons? Is that the idea?
Yeah. Yes, because as of a few weeks ago, again, this episode is quite timely because these things are changing every week. OpenAI rolled out what they call developer mode. Now, developer mode in ChatGPT lets you add a custom connector or essentially a custom MCP server that supports both search and actions. However, when you enable developer mode and when you use a connector based on developer mode, memory is disabled. So because OpenAI is worried, for data exfiltration attacks and things like that. So and these connectors, once again, are not even Mac only; they're web only. They're only available in the ChatGPT web app. They're nowhere to be seen in the iOS app. I think the iOS app only lets you integrate with Gmail and Google Calendar at the moment.
Yeah, that sounds right.
The Notion connector is one of the new ones, but it doesn't show up in the iOS app. So it's, again, very fragmented and very confusing. Perplexity.
I was going to say, it's a little confused. It's strange to me that Anthropic is okay, given their corporate safety reputation or way that they sell the company, that they're okay with actions and OpenAI is not.
Oh, but I should say Anthropic has a really good implementation of permissions. By default, you're always going to be asked, kind of like the shortcuts, permission dialogues. If you want to run an action, any action, you can enable them once, deny them, or always allow them. You can also go in settings and manually whitelist any action that you want to always perform. So it's very nicely done. Perplexity has a similar approach to ChatGPT, kind of, in that they call them connectors. Allegedly, they are working on enabling remote MCPs similar to Claude, but the feature is still not here. They support kind of like ChatGPT, Gmail, Google Calendar, and Notion. Unlike ChatGPT, the Notion integration is both search and actions. So if you use Perplexity on the web, because it's not on iOS, with Notion, you can search for a page, but also append some text to a page.
Okay.
Yeah. And if you have Perplexity on the Mac, there is a helper utility that you can download from the Perplexity website that lets you use local MCP servers on your computer with Perplexity on the Mac. However,
that's good to know. I didn't know that.
However, this integration is very old, And I think Perplexity will have to update it for the new generation of MCP. What are they called? Extensions, bundles. Yes. I don't recommend installing the MCP helper utility because it's like from last year. Yeah, don't do it.
Which is ancient at this point.
Ancient at this point.
In
yes.
AI terms, yeah.
Okay. Google announced at Google I/O way back in May that they were going to support MCP.
And as far as I can tell, they've said nothing since.
Nothing since. Maybe Gemini 3.0, which is rumored to show up soon, like maybe even next week. Yeah. Maybe Gemini 3.0 will have MCP support, but nowhere to be seen. Right now, Gemini can only connect to other Google services and WhatsApp and Spotify. But those are, again, proprietary integrations.
WhatsApp and Spotify. What a pick.
There is, yes, I know, right? There is then a whole sublayer of non-LLM apps, but like actual services that support MCP. For example, Notion, to an extent. Shortwave, I think, is actually an even better example. John, can you tell me about Shortwave and MCP?
Yeah, so Shortwave implemented MCP and they've rolled out specific apps that they can integrate with, Todoist, for instance, Notion. There's a bunch of them, and Shortwave is one of the companies that's doing some of the best AI integrations that I've seen, because their AI agent, which lives in a sidebar, is based on Anthropic. And I don't know if you saw, Federico, they just updated to the latest models, which is really nice, because it's interesting to have watched Shortwave from when I first started using it to today. The AI agent has gotten a lot better over the last 9 months or so. But what I can do, for instance, with Shortwave is I can go into that sidebar and have a message open, and I can say, or a bunch of them selected, and say, send these emails to Notion and put them on this page, and it'll do that, for instance, or send them to Todoist as tasks in my such and such project. It's that kind of thing. That's what MCP is good at. You're just doing natural language requests, taking data from one place and putting it into another without having to understand how the Todoist API works or the Notion API or any of that stuff. It just does it all for you.
Yeah. I think that's I think it's going to be interesting to see how these existing web services that are not LLMs, like Shortwave is an email client, Notion is a note-taking and database service. These apps they're all trying to integrate AI because it's the hot new thing, obviously. But they're also trying to, which I think is an interesting theme because it's something that we've been talking about for years at this point. In integrating with MCP, and this is a story that I've been thinking about for a while as an article on the site. Like MCP, if you think about it, means data portability, right? This idea that like you're not locked into a proprietary silo anymore because of this combination of natural language and external actions. Let me give you an example. A few months ago, I wanted to move from reminders to Todoist. Now I'm back on reminders, but that's a different conversation.
Oh boy, I didn't know that.
Yeah, we gotta talk about this. I think it's interesting. Like, this is totally a tangent, but I think it's interesting what you can do with reminders today.
Yeah,
this idea of like this trio: reminders with Apple Intelligence, the Perplexity integration for voice mode, and the text integration in Claude.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
There's something there that I want to discuss. Anyway,
a
few months ago, I wanted to do the opposite. I wanted to do reminders to Todoist.
Right.
Now, typically, you're locked into reminders. You by default, it used to be that you had to like copy and paste your tasks manually. I know because we've done it a dozen times over the years.
We've done it so many times.
Right. But a few months ago, I had an idea. I thought, well, I took Anders Borum's hypercontext. that is an example of a local extension that you can use on your computer with Claude to bridge Apple services like reminders and Apple Calendar to Claude. So I took hypercontext, enabled it in Claude, and enabled the reminders integration. Then I connected Claude to Todoist via Zapier MCP. Now Todoist has a native MCP server. You no longer need Zapier, but that was not available at the time.
Right.
And I said to Claude, I just said, I want you to take a look at all of my reminders lists, and I want you to recreate my entire reminders setup with the same projects, the same tasks, the same due dates, and the same repeat settings in Todoist. I let it work for like 15 minutes, and it created a perfect replica of my reminders setup in Todoist.
Wow.
And I think there's something to this idea of MCP in a way. It's not just about like, obviously, it's convenient that you're having a conversation with Claude or ChatGPT and you can integrate with the other apps that you use on a regular basis. But there's something to the idea of it benefits data portability for users because you're letting multiple services talk to each other, and because of that, you're no longer locked into a specific ecosystem.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me because we've talked about this so many times. And I think data portability is something that you and I value a lot. And Shortcuts is very much of the same mold. Shortcuts is about being able to get data out of an app and into another app and take actions on it. And what's interesting to me is that one of the things that I think at times has held Shortcuts back is the lack of support for some of the big name service providers out there, whether it's Google or Microsoft or whoever it is. A lot of the bigger productivity apps didn't support it. Spotify certainly doesn't, I don't think. And because AI is the hotness now, it's starting to break those walls down in a way, a cross-platform way, that Shortcuts has never been able to do on its own, just because it was on one platform. And, as much as we love Shortcuts is a little technical for a lot of people. And I think with MCP, what's exciting about it to me is that it kind of democratizes automation and coding in a way that Shortcuts started to do, but it never quite got all the way there because it's still somewhat technical and fiddly, whereas this is just like, send my email to Notion, and it's like that's just about all you have to do a lot of times.
Yeah, and you can get. I think we talked about this. I wrote about it in my making of the iOS 26 review. How I used MCP for like things that you wouldn't normally imagine would be possible. I installed an MCP server to read the Apple developer documentation in Claude because those developer pages are usually not readable by LLMs.
Right.
I used the browser-based MCP, which is a virtual Google Chrome that lets Claude see and interact with web pages that typically cannot be crawled by CloudBot. I use Exa, which is an alternative and really powerful web search engine. You can do all kinds of crazy things with MCP these days. Again, use your best judgment and pay attention to which services you're connecting to and which actions you're granting your authorization. But it is a very exciting landscape that is, however, fragmented and not available on mobile as much as I would like it to be. Claude is the only exception right now. Claude is the only, like, if you want to use all of this MCP hotness on your iPhone, you basically only have Claude as an option right now.
Yeah. It's possible to get things screwed up too. I mean, I know at one point I ended up implementing, I think, Todoist endpoints for both directly in shortwave and through Zapier.
Yes. You had the same tools repeated twice. Yes.
Yes, and that completely broke it.
Yes.
And it was easy to fix, but it took a while to figure out what was going on.
Right. We should have mentioned at the top that, we mentioned tools, but when you enable an MCP based integration, it's based on actions. And those are called tools. There is, I don't know, a search tool, or if you're dealing with Todoist, a create project tool. Another is
conflicts. Yeah.
Yeah. And these are all the tools that are available. And again, Claude has a really nice UI for this, in that it lets you inspect all of the tools that are available and
like
enable or it's like a catalog, and enable or disable the ones that you do or don't want to use.
Yeah.
To sum it all up, it's confusing. It's powerful, but it's confusing, and it's a 1-year-old spec that is going to change again in November, that has so far shown most of its potential on desktop.
Yep.
I think there is a really fascinating mobile story waiting to happen, and I don't think that it's a coincidence that we are starting to see the rumors of Apple working on an MCP framework for iOS 26.1.
Right.
I am very keen to see if Apple is going to do what I think they're going to do, which is provide app intents based integrations for apps like ChatGPT or Claude via a native Apple-made MCP bridge. That is my theory, but we'll see.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, it's interesting to me because I'm trying to think when I first started messing around with MCP. It was pretty early in the year, and I realized at the time that it was still very rough, and I kind of put it to the side and got back into it towards the end of the summer. And it's amazing how much progress they've made in this short time. I mean, it's a lot more usable, although it's confusing, as we explained. It's a lot more usable today than it ever has been, especially if you're working with, kind of the pillars of it all, like Claude, for instance, or you're working through an app that's got really nicely done integration like Notion or Shortwave or something like that. So I think it's worth playing with. And, these things they're usually this is a good question, Federico. I don't know whether this is true or not. Are MCPs available if you have like the free plans for some of these, or do you have to have a paid plan for Claude? I'm not entirely sure. Do you know?
I have no idea.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that because it seems like the kind of thing you might have to pay for. Anyway, I guess we'll have to look into that and get back to people on that. But yeah, that's MCP for you right there.
Hopefully you now have a slightly better understanding of a very confusing and new thing that is changing every week, and it's going to change again next month. So play around with it, be safe, pay attention, but play around with it because it's interesting.
Yeah, and it's only going to get better from here, I think. That's what's nice about it is, as I said, it has improved a lot over the last 12 months, and it's likely to do so again with the new spec coming out in November.
No.
All right, everybody, that's it for this episode. Stick around if you're an AppStories Plus member, because we're going to be talking in the Pro Show about some additional topics. You can find the two of us over at MacStories.net. We're also on social media. Federico is at Viticci. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHNVOORHWS. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.